So let's take a look at what web development and software engineering actually is, how they're similar and how they differ. So what we're going to cover in this is we're going to have a very high level overview of exactly what software engineering is. We'll come to the more detailed aspects of software engineering further into the course. So firstly, we'll look at what actually software engineering is. We'll have a look at syntax of the different languages. We'll write some HTML, we'll write some CSS, and then we'll also be writing some JavaScript on top as well. So what actually is software engineering? And this can mean different things to different people. Some people say that it's all about writing code. Some people say it's about problem solving. And yeah, those things absolutely are part of it. But to me, it's telling a computer in excruciating detail to do something. So for example, you could tell somebody, hey, could you go over there and get this thing for me? Whereas a computer, you would need to tell it exactly the movements that it would need to make in order to accomplish the task that you want it to. So this kind of software engineering, this telling the computer in excruciating detail to do something, follows four major parts. The first being problem solving. We've actually got to solve a problem. We need to define the problem that we're solving, first of all, otherwise we don't really know what we're doing from that point onwards. We need to decide on the approach that we want to take to solve that problem. And that's part of that is that we want to actually decide on the correct algorithms to use. Now, an algorithm is just a set of instructions that a computer in this instance will follow to accomplish something. We need to understand what inputs we're likely to receive to our program. So are the users going to click on buttons, for example, or are they going to type names into a box? We also want to kind of understand what outputs we're going to give to our user. Are we going to log them into something? Or are we going to give them a calculation based on some mortgage data or some financial data? We need to know what we're trying to give them before we try and solve the problem. Next up, we actually have to write some code. So we have to write a program to solve that problem that we have defined recently. And what this basically means is we use text editors or integrated development environments to create the files that the computer will then read and run. And basically this is typing out the correct syntax for the language's compiler or interpreter. Now, when I talk about syntax, all it is using the correct combinations of words and letters and symbols to make sense in whichever language you're using or typing in. When I talk about compilers or interpreters, don't worry too much about that right now. But basically what that means is that some computer languages, we can write the code and then compile it down into all of the zeros and ones that the computer can actually understand. An interpreter, on the other hand, we give the computer our code that we've written, and then it will run it line by line as it executes the program. Don't worry about it too much now. We'll come on to that in far more detail later on. Well, we've written our code. What now? Well, we need to fix all of the bugs that we have inevitably introduced into our code. They're often just typos. Maybe we've accidentally left off a dot somewhere or a semicolon somewhere. Maybe we used the wrong function in our code. So an example in JavaScript is there's two functions or two methods called splice and slice. Now these can look very similar when they're written on a screen, but they do different things. So it can be very easy to sometimes just use the wrong bit of the language that you're typing in. Bugs can also be caused by incorrect maths. So an example of this might be that you're trying to work out somebody's age based on the year that they were born. So you should be able to just subtract that from the current year, right? Well, that would depend on whether their birthday has been in the current year yet. So you might have something called an off by one error there, where you've just not quite got the correct maths for what you expected on the output. So how do we get these bugs? How do we understand what bugs we have to fix? Well, we do that by testing. And in its most basic form, testing is just using your software to understand where things aren't maybe working the way that you think that they should. So you can pretend to be a user and you can sort of click a button to make sure that when you do that thing, the expected output or the expected result happens. If it doesn't, then you need to pop back to the bug fixing phase, possibly back to the writing code phase, and possibly even actually defining a new problem that you need to solve. There are actually lots of testing libraries and software that's already been written out there that will help us test our code for us so that we get fewer bugs and we end up spending less time writing code to fix those bugs. So let's now look at what makes up the internet and web pages on the internet. Well, there are 3 languages that work on the web, and that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Note, not Java. Java is a completely different language. And it's actually an easy way to know if somebody knows what they're talking about if they refer to JavaScript as Java. So HTML is like the structure of our web page. It's kind of the bones that make up the kind of where everything fits onto a web page. All of the content, all of our headings, and all of our images. The CSS, on the other hand, is how it looks. It can do a lot of layout as well, and it can choose colors, we can choose fonts, we can choose exactly where things go, sizes of elements, etc., etc. We'll have a look at this in a moment. And then we can also add JavaScript to our web pages. And this is the interactivity. So we can do things based on user input. So when a user clicks a button, what happens? We can use JavaScript to program the interactivity of our website. So that's a basic overview of the 3 languages that make up every single web page on the internet. Some web pages may only use HTML and CSS, but modern websites will probably use all 3. So let's actually talk syntax and the symbols and letters and words that make up all of these languages. So first of all, we have HTML. And in HTML, we have what's called tags. Now, a basic HTML website that we can see output on the right here, it just says, it has a big heading of welcome to my website, and we can see that we've used H1 tags here to create that. We've got a slightly smaller subheading here as well, which is denoted by the H2 tags. And then we have the main content of our website, which is denoted by P tags, and this just means paragraph. So you'll notice that every bit of content kind of has an opening tag and a closing tag. That's not always the case, but a general rule would be that you open your tag to say, I'm starting this kind of element. Then we write the content of that element, and then we close it again. Now, just looking at this HTML that's written on the left here, you'll see that let's go through this line by line. You'll see at the top, we've got this doctype HTML. And all this does is it tells the browser that we're using the latest version of HTML, HTML version 5. We also have opening tags there with HTML. Now, to be a valid HTML document, you will always need an opening and closing HTML tag. You'll notice as well in that HTML tag, we've got what's called an attribute, and we're using the lang attribute en to say that our website is in English. You'll see that we've got tags inside of tags here as well. So we have head tags that have meta tags and title tags inside them. Now the head tags aren't visible to us as a user. These are just used by the browser to give meta information or information about the website that the browser will use. It's important to note that you can put code in the head that will execute. So for example, JavaScript. We'll come on to that a little more in a bit. You'll notice as well that after the head tags, we have our body tags. Now the body tags are what the user will be able to see on our website. This is kind of the user viewable content of our website. Just a little bit of a note on the H1 and H2. We actually have 6 levels of heading available to us. It only goes to 6. There's no H7. We can't keep going smaller and smaller. This is not unlimited. Generally speaking, H1, 2, 3, and maybe 4 is probably enough for most websites, but you do have 6 available to you if you like. So this is all very well and good. We've got our HTML output on the right there, but it looks a little bit boring. How do we add some styling to that? Well, we can use something called CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. Now, on the left here, you'll see that we've got just the GitHub homepage. This is actually my GitHub dashboard logged in. It looks great. It looks nice and easy to navigate. We've got some stuff on the right-hand side that's colourful and exciting, and we've got layout of 3 different columns. Now, if we remove all of the CSS from this web page, you'll get what we have on the right here. Now, I don't know about you, but I would much prefer to use the website that's on the left rather than the one on the right. The CSS just concerns itself with the look and feel of our websites. So how do we write some CSS? Well, we use what's called selectors and properties. So, for example, you'll see here on the left, we've got our CSS, and on the right, we have the same website that we viewed before in the HTML section. You'll see that we've taken the entire body of our website by using the body, saying body, and then in curly brackets, we've then added these properties. So we've said, make the background color this aquamarine color. We're going to use something called display flex, which just means that we can change the layout of where things are. And in this instance, we're saying put everything into a column and make everything central. We've also said our H1, our main heading, we want that to be in the font Arial. Well, what are the other 2 then? Well, you see, you can't always guarantee exactly which fonts your user is going to have available to them. So what we do is we add fallback fonts. So what we're doing here is we're saying Arial is the font that we want people to see our website in. But if they don't have Arial available to them, no worries, just show them Helvetica. If that then is they don't have Arial or Helvetica, we're saying, hey, just go and show them any sans serif font that you have available. Now you'll see that the difference between a serif font and a sans serif font is if you look at the difference between the red and the yellow text on the output on the right, you'll see that the yellow text has little ticks on the ends of the letters. These are the serifs. Whereas the H1, the welcome to my website, does not have these. And sans is just the French for without. So it's without serifs. You'll see there that we've also changed the color of that top H1 to crimson. And you'll notice as well that we're using the American spelling of color. If we spell it with a U, it will not work. H2, we've actually changed to a different kind of color. Now this looks a little bit weird. Now this is just called a hex code. It's nothing to worry about. And basically we're using hexadecimal counting. So that's normally when you count to 10 from 0 to 9, you're using what's called base 10 counting. Well, with this, we can count from 0 to 16 instead. Don't worry, we'll come on to this much later on in the course. But basically what this is the first two characters of that hex code, so BA in this instance, is just how much red there is in the colour. The second two is how much green there is in the colour, and the last is how much blue there is in the colour. And you'll see that we've also styled our P fonts as well. Okay, great. So that's a very basic way that we can take elements from our HTML and style them in our CSS. So how do we actually make it a little bit more interesting? Well, we can use JavaScript to do that. So what I've done here is you'll see that I've taken a snippet of the HTML just here at the top. And what we've done is we've added an ID to our H1. And inside our JavaScript, I've written what's called a function. And a function is just a reusable block of code that we can use later on. And we've said, if the style of our title is crimson, we want to change it to green. But if it's anything else, we want to change it back to crimson. Okay, that's great. But how do we actually get it to run? So what we've done here is we've used something called a set interval. And basically what this will do is it will run whichever function we tell it to any number of times. Now we've added 500 as the second argument to that, but don't worry if this doesn't make too much sense right now. And what that says is run this change color function every 500 milliseconds. So every half a second, we want it to change from green to crimson or from crimson to green. We'll get into this in a lot more detail later on in the course, but this is just one way that you can see that we're using JavaScript to kind of manipulate the HTML and the CSS on our website. So let's get writing some code in the next section.